Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Our guest today is Alex Price of FINITE Community. And Alex does a bunch of other things, but he is an expert in digital marketing, what's happening now in B2B marketing. And he's been doing research with his organization on current trends. I mean, the world's been a little bit topsy-turvy the last 2 years, so he's going to give us some clarity on some major movements that we all need to hear if we're going to be marketing successfully in 2022 and beyond. So listen carefully as Alex Price joins our show. Well, welcome, Alex, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here. Looking forward to talking.
Absolutely. Now, Alex, you wear a couple of hats. I just want to give you a moment to, for our listeners, to explain, what you do primarily and who you do it for.
Absolutely, yeah. So I run a community for B2B tech and SaaS marketers, and actually B2B marketers more widely than that, but with a bit of a tech focus called FINITE. So finite.community is our website, and really our goal is to bring together B2B marketers to connect, share, learn, grow. So we have a Slack community, we do research reports, some of which we're going to talk through. We host webinars, really just bringing together the community, encouraging sharing, learning, connection. We found help people find new jobs, and it's really awesome, the kind of the community that we've been building around FINITE. Alongside that, actually, with a kind of another hat on, I run a digital agency. We've got a couple of sides to the business where we do a lot of design and build work and a lot of digital marketing, SEO, paid type work for the B2B tech space primarily. But yeah, today I think we're going to be talking mainly about FINITE and some of the research we've done recently.
Okay, and just for clarity's sake, you're based in London, is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So based in London, our community is pretty global, but the agency side of the business is primarily based in London. We're a team of about 35 people altogether. And yeah, the community in FINITE is now a couple of thousand members that have kind of signed up to join. I think we're about 50-60% EMEA, and then the rest kind of spread around APAC and the US. So it's been growing really nicely, especially since COVID, with everything going online, which has been
truly a global community, what you just described this. So that's exciting, and just to see, I'm sure that there's some things that are a little different and some things are a lot the same, just because you're still dealing with people. So that's interesting. So at the beginning in our pre-talk, we hit on the fact that you're committed to, and you've done a great deal of research, and you're finding some things that are interesting, that may be not obvious. So why don't you share with us a little bit about some of the top level findings that you're hitting on right now that you think are useful to anyone who's in marketing? And a lot of our listeners may not always be the formal VP of marketing. It's like an owner operator of a manufacturing business, and they have to figure it out too. So it doesn't change the title. The title doesn't matter as much as the function. They still have to get this stuff done. So if you could just share some thoughts with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing we do through FINITE every year is we run basically an annual kind of benchmarking report where we look at how's the year just gone, and what's the future looking like when we move into next year. How are people feeling? What are their biggest challenges? Where are budgets going? Those kind of things. And yeah, through the lens of, and this is the great thing about having an engaged community in FINITE, is that we can survey our members and put together some really basically fresh and unique insights on those kind of questions. So we kicked off the report basically looking back and what happened in 2021. And I think we were quite happy to see that it was a pretty optimistic picture. I think about 80% of those that we surveyed were able to meet or outperform their marketing targets in 2021. So when we asked the same question the year before, I think it was a lower number. I think it was more like, what about 60 something, 70%. So a positive shift in the marketers within our community really achieving their outcomes, KPIs. Hopefully that's part of being a FINITE member. They've got so much knowledge and connection from it that it's helped with all their marketing efforts. But yeah, that was a positive thing to see. And then one thing we really like to look at is kind of, where is marketing budget going? Like, which channels are marketers or companies investing in the B2B space? It's interesting when you compare B2B and B2C, the different budgets go in different directions. But events had a bit of a kind of resurgence. I think 44% of marketers said that channel had kind of grown in importance for them again in the last year. SEO, I think in the last couple of years, we've seen as being really the big winner. And particularly in more legacy industries, outside of the tech space as well, but tech too, in B2B services, in more industrial industries and services industries. SEO, I think, has often been looked at as that channel that isn't really for us. People don't buy our products online. People don't research. We do business over a handshake, right? We negotiate contracts face to face. We meet customers in person. People don't sign £1 million contracts over off a Google search. And I think that the reality is that actually they do these days. Like it happens, and it happens regularly. And we see it across our clients, where we work with some big clients on the agency side, and we see SEO leads coming in where people fill out a form and say, can you respond to this quote? It's for £500,000. And our clients are like, wow, people really do. There is a whole new generation that begin their buyer journeys in this way. And Google had some great stats, even from, I think, 2015, saying something like 70+% of B2B buyer journeys start with a Google. And that was data from 2015. So if that was 2015, just imagine what that is now. So,
well, just think about it too, Alex, this way, generationally, like who are in procurement departments, who are the new middle manager, somebody who's between 35 and 40 years old, that grew up in a digital age. I mean, they're used to it. This is why not. And that whole issue, and of course, it's often been quoted, many different reports have pointed to it, about how much further the buyer is down their buyer's journey before they even engage with a potential supplier or vendor. So it's rare that you're going to show up, knock on somebody's door and say, I have a completely new idea. You weren't thinking about this before. Occasionally you can do that. That's a hard way to do business, but you really need to be available with really great content, I think is what you're telling us, for when people are looking, that you actually make the short list. And if you're not there, you're not there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's 2 points there. One is that SEO is great as a channel because it kind of works across the stages of the funnel, if you like. So whether your intent is really high and you're ready to convert immediately, SEO can serve a role. And even if you're just doing some really early stage research and looking to educate yourself on a topic, SEO plays its role. So it's kind of like a full funnel channel, I think, in some respects. So yeah, really, really kind of powerful from that perspective. I think to your point as well, the other side of this is that as strategists, as marketers, we often, I think, over optimize towards too senior a stakeholder, and we make assumptions about only the C-suite making decisions. But as you say, like, it's not them doing research, it's not them shortlisting, it's not them understanding the market. Sure, they're involved in the decision-making unit at a certain stage, but more and more, I think that gets later and later. So when we're working on our personas and we're thinking, who are we selling to? I think often it's important to remember not to focus too much on just the CTO, the CFO, the CEO, whoever it might be. There's a whole team of younger, more digitally savvy people underneath him or her that are using channels like SEO and fundamentally, I think, trusting what they find on Google more than the generation before them did.
And there's that, and I think just to flip that a little bit, that C-suite person is trusting the people they put in place to do this exact job.
Yeah.
So if all of a sudden we need to, let's say I'm looking for, our logistics are messed up. We've been really crushed with the supply chain because we didn't have visibility to things. That CFO or CEO is saying, fix it. That's about the degree of detail that they really get into. And they're expecting that the team knows what fix it means and will proceed on all the necessary scrutiny to come up with a solution. And maybe there's a presentation to the C-suite somewhere to say, we think we found the answer. And it's like a half-hour meeting where they say, are you sure this is it? Okay. And it's already been budgeted. And so sometimes sellers aiming for that, I want to talk to the CEO, unless you're selling to an owner-led business, like where I often live in that 5, 10, $20 million range, where the owner really is the person making that decision. But once you're selling to corporates, getting to the CFO isn't that useful, as much as building the support of the rest of the team that needs to say, yes, this will work, or else you're not going to get the sale.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, that was interesting. That the channel mix is always a fun one to look at. I think after that, we started looking at, looking forwards a bit more, how are people feeling, really optimistic outlook. I think 71% of marketers that we surveyed said they were optimistic about their marketing strategy, their goals for 2022, which was nice to see. And I think importantly, seeing a lot more support for marketing at the senior leadership level within an organization. So we said, we asked the question, like, do you see support and understanding for marketing at a board level in your organization increasing? And I think 76% said yes. So whether that's because marketing is becoming a more data-driven discipline and that gives more visibility and the C-suite like numbers. Is it, someone gave some free text feedback saying, underinvestment from previous years is starting to show. I think more high profile tactics coming into play. So a number of reasons, but I think generally another really good reason to be optimistic about the investment in marketing. And we saw that reflected in our question about budgets too. So we went from, in 2021, when we asked the question, about half of marketers said their budgets were remaining the same. And about 30 or so percent said they were going up, the rest were going down. We saw a big shift. So instead of, we saw 64% saying their marketing budget's going up in 2022. So yeah, that was 35% year before. So some of that's COVID related, I'm sure. Our community is made up from a mix of different businesses, some of which will have been impacted by COVID more than others, in certain kind of subsectors of B2B tech. But again, generally really an optimistic outlook, I think. So good to see more spend there.
Well, isn't one of the drivers, I mean, we just started kind of developing this thought earlier in this conversation, but it's the fact that the buyer is much more, in traditional B2B, the seller was seen as being in the driver's seat. The seller had to make contact, had to find the right people, and then the seller was also bringing the information. Let me explain to you our Cyclotron 9000, how it works and how our software works, or whatever it is. Now, the buyer is expecting all that information to be presented, not just comprehensively, but in an easy to consume fashion. It shouldn't make my head hurt to understand your technology, your software, your solution. And so if I want to talk to you, I'm really getting down to brass tacks, right? I'm talking maybe about implementation, talking about certainly cost options. I'm talking about maybe I'm a little fuzzy on option A versus option B. Do I really need this feature, and so on? So that seems to put marketing much more in the center of the sales process. No longer just supporting sales. It's actually in many ways a primary driver of sales. Do you see trends happening in that direction where maybe the sales function starts changing with the use of marketing technology and marketing disciplines?
Absolutely, yeah. So you've set me up absolutely perfectly for the next piece of
okay. And we didn't rehearse, audience. We just came to this. No, this is good. This is good, Alex.
So we asked about I guess how sales and marketing work together. Obviously, in the B2B environment, there's a lot of debate around sales and marketing alignment. We see a lot of more enterprise companies moving towards account-based marketing and that really forcing more sales and marketing alignment in a lot of respects. We asked a bit about what marketing team structures would look like, and we had a response that we wanted to understand whether marketing and sales would sit separately, whether they might be united under a kind of revenue function overall. And our results were that 43% of the marketing teams we surveyed will sit together with sales in a kind of united revenue function, which was interesting. We hadn't actually asked this question before, so it was hard to benchmark against previous years, but I think nonetheless really interesting to see that way of structuring things. I think I see it working best in the more when there is a more enterprise sales motion where marketing and sales are forced to work more together, as opposed to like the more kind of product-led growth, $10 a month SaaS onboarding. You click a button, you sign up, the product does the rest. Where I think that's much more marketing and product working together. Whereas at the enterprise end of the spectrum, it's much more marketing and sales working together, and probably other functions too. So yeah, I think that's a trend. There's a lot of debate around the downsides of that too. We see the chief revenue officer role becoming more and more common. Equally, a lot of marketers saying they're all from a sales background, they don't get marketing. Marketing should have a seat at the table. The CMO should be there. If you need a CRO, then what's wrong with the CEO? Is he that busy he can't have a chief sales officer and a chief marketing officer reporting into him? So I don't know. I hear a lot of quite opinionated perspectives on whether that's the future.
Yeah, or not. In my sense, when I hear that, I say it's oftentimes, especially very technical people, want to come up with the template, the model, right? We love models, business models, organizational models. So we want to say this is the model. And the reality is actual mileage can vary greatly depending on the circumstance, right? So if you have a CEO that happens to be a great product visionary, right? Really knows how to create, has an ear or heart for the marketplace, knows what the market wants in terms of what to make, for example, but isn't necessarily so great in terms of running sales process. And, and I've been in organizations, large organizations, where the sales team, we're told, hey, good news, the CEO is going to be in town. You can take him on to sales meetings. And they would be like, oh no, we have to take the CEO to a sales meeting. Like, that's not what they thought was a good idea. They loved the CEO, but they didn't want him necessarily in front of a customer, because all too often was shooting from the hip, too little information. If you're a sales team working a deal for 6 months, you have intimate knowledge, and you can't on the car ride over to the appointment, you can't transmit all of that to your CEO, and no CRM is going to capture all of the nuance of that. So actual mileage varies. You're going to have CEOs that can be the CRO, and you're going to have organizations that have just not really moved the needle. And that's where they put a CRO in place to really say, okay, we need to really ramp up our sales process. But it's interesting. You said 43% are saying they're going to sit together, so to speak, metaphorically or physically, however they do it.
Exactly,
because they're seeing this now more of a continuation of a real one process that really has to be thought through, which is, how do we grab attention? How do we communicate our value? And how do we close business?
Yeah.
What do you see as a counter trend to that? Anything happening that is saying, well, that's good for that 43%, but others, and you alluded to it, really want to keep these things very siloed and separate?
Yeah, I think everybody wants, and it fundamentally comes down to great relationships, and communication is important. Working together is important, whichever way you do this, regardless of whether you're separate teams. I think one trend to counteract that, not necessarily counteract, but a different way of doing things, might be that we're seeing marketing teams investing more in having like marketing development reps. So instead of having SDRs or BDRs within the marketing team, they might have an MDR role. It's sometimes been described as, which is someone that's really able to take care of that kind of interface between marketing and sales, and do some qualification, and has the skills to do some kind of marketing focused, qualification of new opportunities, but also feed that back into marketing. So I think that's quite an interesting function, maybe a middle ground of bridging the two sides. I think a big pain point we hear a lot in the community is, we pass our leads over to sales and we kind of never hear anything again, or they don't use Salesforce properly, or it just kind of disappears into a black hole, or they prefer to work their own leads because they're incentivized in terms of their remuneration or whatever to go and find their own stuff rather than deal with the leads we've given them, or all these kind of pain points. So I think the MDR role can be an interesting way of dealing with that specific challenge. But on your previous point around the revenue officer role, I think what's interesting in terms of the challenge is that whilst there's a lot of benefits to that role overarching everything, there's a brand piece, I think, which is really key. And a lot of the reason that marketers, I think, feel uncomfortable with someone who's, let's be honest, often from a sales background,
Sure.
in that chief revenue officer role, is how much do they understand, care, or are willing to invest in specifically the kind of brand marketing, the stuff that doesn't have hard, fast numbers attached to it, that's difficult to report on, that often people in the C-suite just don't get. And I think in certain B2B niches, there's a real opportunity to invest in brand more, to build a brand, and not just think short term about demand gen and leads. And the risk potentially is having someone in the chief revenue officer role that's able and willing to recognize that and invest budget in the right places, not just be saying, not looking at everything with a 30-day view or a quarterly view, saying, where are my leads and how much pipeline are we going to close, but actually, where are we in 3 years, and have we built a market leading brand?
Right. And it's interesting. Branding is one of those things that the presence of good marketing is, no one acknowledges. It's just part of like the air, and then the sales success is because our salespeople are really great. They're just great people. But the absence of good branding is going to be felt downstream. So it's one of those things that when it's going well, nobody notices it because it's doing what it's supposed to do. And it's only in its absence, or if it's missing the mark, that it starts showing up as consequential in terms of sales campaigns and other things. We realize, gee, we're not getting the respect we need. We weren't invited to that opportunity, or they don't view us as being capable of handling this or that kind of level of challenge. All those things are because your branding, your value proposition, none of that's clear to the market. So you can sell the heck out of it. And personally, as a sales professional, you can compensate for that to a degree. But then we're left with, we win when we're superhuman. And you cannot have a squad of everyone superhuman. You'll have one or two superhumans and everyone else just regular human, and you have to support it with brands. So that's very interesting. And I agree with you. But that pressure, that quarterly pressure, either because they're already public or they want to get there, they're being driven by VC or private equity and so on, is a real challenge to think on the longer term investments that good branding, good positioning, really thinking through the strategy really makes a big difference. It makes all the difference.
I think the reality is that both can happen, right? And the trap we fall into is by saying, are you investing in brand or are you investing in performance? And it's not one or the other. And actually, even doing what we call performance marketing, like LinkedIn ads, builds your brand to some extent. And there's some things you do on the performance side that is helping to build a brand. But equally, if you've built the brand, your LinkedIn ads are going to be way more effective. So it's kind of like this ladder climbing exercise where as you do more of each, they kind of support one another, I think. And we shouldn't be talking about them as you can only do one or the other. It's but both can be invested in. I think that the favorite stat around this, it's not from our research. I think it's from the B2B Institute, which is part of LinkedIn, that did some research around this and basically concluded that I think 95% of B2B buyers are not in market for your solution at any one time. And how they arrived at that, I don't know. They worked with a university in Australia, I believe, and some marketing professors. So I'm sure there was some science behind it, but I think that's a staggering number. And it just feeds the argument for building a brand, because if 95% of people are not ready to buy from you and are not in market, well, how are you going to engage them and be ready for them when they are in market? And the only way you can do that is by building a brand. If you just focus on short-term demand gen, you'll only ever get a little bit of that 5%. You'll never get any of the remaining 95%.
And I also think it can create a culture of failure, meaning if you don't grab hold of the fact that, okay, this, we've target marketed super sharply, so we know 100% of who we should be talking to. But if only 5% of that 100% are ever going to be available to at any given, which makes sense, 1 in 20 at any given year are interested in that category, you could feel like, boy, we're failing, when in fact you might be just killing it at getting the full 5%. You're doing it well. But the only way is if they were aware of you for when it was their turn in the bucket, so to speak. And that, now to say, who do we turn to? Well, oh yeah, that company, because they've been educating me. They've been sending me reasonable content. I've been seeing them at events. I've heard their speakers or their executives speak at different things. I read that white paper. All those things contribute to an awareness. So when it's time, when it's their turn in that 5%, you're on the short list. I mean, it sounds like that sounds reasonable, but as you pointed out, some of the other exigent pressures can keep people from doing or making those kind of investments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Alex, first of all, this has been fantastic. I love this topic. It's great. Thank you for bringing some real data to us on this. And really thank you for the work you're doing with FINITE. I mean, just pulling that together and giving marketers a forum, an opportunity to really, share best practices, ideas, as all these things change very quickly. So if somebody listening said, I want to learn more about either what you do, if you in terms of your agency work, or what you do with FINITE, how should they best get a hold of you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. Alex Price. If you look for FINITE or 93 Digital or 93X or any of those kind of things, I should appear. So yeah, happy to connect with anyone there. And finite.community is the website for any listeners that want to sign up and join the community.
Fantastic. Well, Alex Price, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing with our audience at the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of the Revenue Throughput Podcast. If you like this episode and if you like the series, make sure you subscribe below. And also, if you liked it, please do review it. When people are looking for something exciting to listen to, especially the kind of content we're bringing, which is practical insights for B2B companies, this is a place and a free resource that they can take advantage of. Let them know about it with your review. So subscribe, review, enjoy. Thanks again.